Welcome to another episode of the Relationship Toolbox, a show about the skills we need to build healthy relationships with others. This morning I'd like to start out with a question for you, our viewers. Have you had something like this happen within the last week, say? You've said yes to someone when you really wanted to say no. You gave in to someone's unreasonable request just to avoid a scene or perhaps hurting their feelings. Or perhaps you remained silent when a coworker whom you confided in shared what you confided in her with the boss. Or you accused your life partner of being insensitive to your feelings. All these are sort of common indicators that our boundaries have been crossed, and we need to pay attention to that. The system, or the way we can tell, is our feelings begin to alert us, because usually when this happens, we're left with feelings of frustration, resentment, betrayal, maybe vengefulness. So when those feelings crop up, that's generally a sign a boundary is involved here.
Yeah, and we get signals from our body sometimes. So in our first show, in the first of this three-part series about healthy boundaries, we discussed how boundaries serve as limits on our behavior, like what behavior we're willing to display or to tolerate from other people. And boundaries can also serve as a guide for us to share our values, such as if something's going on around us that we don't care for, we can assert our boundaries in that situation. And we talked about how boundaries could be rigid, as drawing the line in the sand and you're not going to go beyond that, or how they could be flexible, as the physical distance that you might choose to have between you and a person. It could be flexible between different people, or even in that same relationship as you get closer and more comfortable and intimate with each other. So we are going to today talk about where do these boundaries come from? How do we recognize them? And what do they mean to us about our tolerance? And how do we incorporate them in our lives?
Okay. So I believe it's fair to say that our boundaries are learned. And the first learning source for that is our family of origin. So parents are a large influence on helping us to create boundaries that we don't even think about.
So we come with a legacy of
That's right. In our formative years, they just are there,
and
we absorb
part
them.
of everything, yeah.
And then, of course, as we get older, life experiences become another source for forming those boundaries. In terms of these formative years with our family, I guess one of the things would be questions I would have is if you had brothers or sisters, what was your way that your parents treated you? Was there a difference by gender? Was there a difference by personality? And what message did that give you?
Was there maybe a difference by birth order too, in
Yes.
terms of the expectations about age and maturity? That can come into play, and it may, depending on where you were in the birth order, you are affected for the rest of your life in terms of what the expectations were of you. Yeah.
I actually had my mother once even categorize the three of us. I had two older sisters, and she had a way of describing each one of us that was different in identity, and I realized I had absorbed that in my thinking about the family. How free were you as a child to present or to think about a view or have an opinion that was different from that of your parents? Was that frowned upon? Did they try to control you and say, no, this is the way it should be? Or did they respect your point of view?
And there's a certain amount of that happens with that anyway, just in terms of developmental age, when you start to kind of self-actualize and become that different person. So,
and how your parent responds to that.
And at what age that became okay.
Yes.
Maybe in some cases never. Still as an adult, their boundaries are supposed to be your boundaries sometimes. Yeah.
How about sometimes when you express feelings, were your parents telling you, no, that's not okay to feel that way. You should feel this way. And that, again, carries a strong message, which we can absorb in the form of a boundary later in our life. What were some of the unspoken rules in your family about dealing with conflict? That was really a powerful
And we've talked
one.
about the different styles that people can take as
Right.
in conflict. Yeah.
So did your family teach you to avoid conflict, that conflict is bad?
Or to accommodate at any risk,
Or to attack it and don't let anybody treat you
to
that
be
way?
defensive. Yeah.
What was the message that you received from your family of origin in terms of privacy? Were things like a diary or your phone,
Or even closing your door.
entering your room, without permission, was that granted, or did your parents act as if you had no right to that? What about revealing family secrets? Again, what was the message you received in your family from that? Was it, oh my gosh, my parents are so open with this is embarrassing, talking about private things in the family? Or was it just the opposite? And all of a sudden, we don't talk about those things. We don't even acknowledge them.
As if it doesn't even exist. If we don't talk about it, it doesn't exist.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we have this collection of a legacy of boundaries that are foisted on us or granted to us or given to us, which people's intentions are, boundaries are to keep us safe. And the loving people in our lives want to keep us safe, and everybody has a different interpretation of what is needed. But then we go out into the world and we get to learn about other people's boundaries, because then we're bumping into other people who came from other families of origin, and we're trying to figure out, and when those clash, what are the edges? So we have individual experiences in our school years and in our working years to try to figure out in different settings what might those boundaries and expectations be. What are the rules of engagement? And how do I get along with people? How do I sense a belonging? How do I get what I need? How do I feel accepted and brought into that? What do I have to do? How do I have to behave in order to get those things?
Often within a school setting for us as we first encounter this.
Would be the next one. And maybe you have to start to understand how to code switch between one area of your life and another area of your life in terms of what the boundaries are. And it can become really nuanced. Finally, just your own personal experiences can affect your level of comfort with your edges, at where you stop and others begin. And that could come out of health issues or accidents or trauma that you have experienced, or grief or loss. And so that can shape you and influence where you set your limits of interaction. So we are then left with this kind of a conglomeration of like an internal software of what our family taught us, what our friends and our coworkers have taught us, our life experiences, and we have designed our own personal set of operating instructions, which are boundaries. And if we didn't have them, we would just kind of be drifting and reacting to whatever situation happened to us without any kind of blueprint. So we need these in order to cope with every day. But sometimes we haven't questioned them, and we're just not in touch with it. And
they're almost subconscious with us.
And we need to examine that and tweak it from time to time, because we're going to change over time. So how do we identify the boundaries that we have assumed or taken on for ourselves, either adopted from somebody else or created through our bumps and bruises and learning experiences? Like, how do we label it, examine it, and if we don't like what we see, how do we change it? Can we change it?
Well, the answer to that one is easy.
Good.
Yes, we can change our boundaries, but you can't change something that you're unaware of. So the important point here is how to become, first of all, aware of our boundaries. One of the first, there are 3 steps really that we recommend for doing that. And one is to become aware of our feelings, our emotions. They are the first alert system that something isn't quite right.
I think what we're looking at right now is something that's borrowed from Mark Brackett's research, and he calls it the mood meter. And it's on 2 axes of like pleasantness and energy. And there is quite a nice variety of vocabulary there.
That's important to have that. When you referenced before, a traumatic experience in our life can have a very intense creation of a boundary for us, whereas other things might be not quite as intense for us and make it easier for us to adjust.
So it's good not only from our internal coping mechanisms to know what we're feeling, but also if we're communicating to other people,
Yes.
To have this vocabulary.
So that's the first step. And the second one is to sort of track the thoughts that are going through our mind. For example, if someone bumped into me and I thought, well, how rude, and who do they think they are? I'm beginning to feed that feeling with my thoughts and to almost sometimes distort my thinking, because I really don't know what might have happened. It might have been deliberate, it might have been by an accident. So I have to be careful of that thought process, but that starts my understanding of where my boundaries are. And finally, we need to become aware of our universal 7 human needs that we have, which we have on the screen for you. And we need to identify which of these is being involved, is impacting the particular situation that we're reacting to. So you can see so at the bottom, there are some physical or survival needs that we all have. I encountered this once when I was mediating some conflict in an office setting, when there was a lot of conflict over what the temperature should be in the office. Should the windows be open, and so forth. So people had different boundaries about, I want fresh air, no, that's too much for me, I have allergies. All those boundaries were involved in that conflict. We have safety concerns, both for emotions and physical things. We have love, acceptance, and respect, a sense of belonging. That's a very powerful feeling with the human being. And we'll find that many of the boundaries that we have constructed fall into that particular need. The need for control in our life, some autonomy, to have some sense of direction for our own life without being told everything or being confined. And the need for success, something that we feel proud of, that we can achieve in our life. And in order to do that, we have to have opportunity for us to be able to practice that skill or that interest that we have. And finally, the need for purpose that we all have, which for young people often takes the form of, what am I going to be when I grow up? To when we're older, thinking, what mark do I want to leave in life? How do I want others to have thought about me in my life, what I stood for?
And even that purpose, if you've ascended to that need, that ability to identify that, can change over time. Like, when you're going through empty nest, or you change a job and you have to kind of figure out, well, what am I doing? Who am I now?
Right. It's evolving, and it's going from, well, that's what I thought of and accepted when I was a child, but now as an adult, I view things differently.
We should say that a lot of people have talked about how to describe this kind of continuum of human needs. Maslow was the first, but many people, and this is an adaptation of kind of a conglomeration of a lot of people's work. So let's move away from the kind of intellectual talk, and let's talk about some hypothetical situations where boundaries could come into play, and our feelings and what our needs are and our reaction. So we can
actually identify all these steps.
Yeah. So you asked some questions at the beginning of the episode today, and one was about the boundary of like a trust between information that you have shared in what you thought was in confidence. So what are the boundary issues if somebody shares information about you that was your understanding, that was a private conversation. It could be a coworker in a work situation, or it could be a friend in a larger group of friends. But
it could be with a spouse, even if you shared something in
and
confidence.
Then
and
you
then they
heard
shared it with
about
your
it.
spouse.
It's like, wow. So in terms of the feelings that I might have are like shock, first of all, and betrayal and anger, a little bit of anxiety if I feel like I've been compromised in whatever social setting that was, whether it was a workplace or a friend or the neighbors.
How am I going to interact with that person from this point on?
There could be embarrassment or shame or humiliation, and I might just want to, like, the next time that tit for tat, which is not mature, and we're not recommending it, but it's just an authentic, So my need for safety, emotional safety probably in this case, and for acceptance and a sense of belonging has been attacked there by just that sharing, whether it was intentional or unintentional.
So what would you be thinking in your mind, perhaps, if that were to happen?
It's like, why did that person do that? Can I trust this person? I thought I could trust this friend or this coworker or my partner. Didn't they know that this how I would feel, that this was private? And then I might be thinking about, well, what was their motive? Was it an accident? Or are they trying to curry favor with my boss or with this friend group? You know, information sometimes is power. How will I might just kind of like retreat, but I could also be angry. There's a lot of emotions, but my need is mostly for safety. I'm feeling vulnerable, and like that part of me that belonged very comfortably might have been compromised.
So some of your autonomy, your ability to make decisions about how you want to be presented to another person has been violated.
And I would change. I might reevaluate my boundary. I'm not going to be as comfortable sharing personal information, private information, information that's intimate or not secret, but just revealing.
So it helps you to identify that is a boundary, and also how do I distinguish, and identify this person I think I can trust because that boundary will work, and this person I'm not so sure of because that is my boundary and I want to respect it, and I'm not going to ignore it or violate it myself.
And sometimes this is also very informative of us. If we have been betrayed, it demonstrates how we need to behave with other people's boundaries as well.
There's a lesson in there, isn't
there's a lesson in there. Sometimes it's a very hard lesson. So friends sometimes ask us to do things that we're not really comfortable with doing, but we end up either being silent or...
Right, I'm thinking of a hypothetical situation where, say, a not real close friend, but someone that I'm close to and have contact with, asks me to co-sign on a loan that she's taken because she doesn't have the equity and she doesn't have the credit to do that, to satisfy the bank.
So what are you feeling there?
So she asks me to co-sign on that loan, and without thinking too much, I say, oh, okay.
Because you're feeling pressured socially to
Well, I
belong.
just hadn't thought about that. I just said to my friend, sure, I'll help my friend out.
Okay.
And in hindsight, I'm looking at this and thinking, whoa, I'm getting some strong feelings that are letting me know a boundary has been crossed here. So
And it might be a personal boundary, but if you're talking about a financial boundary, that might be something that you have in common with another person as well.
Well, it has much more implications in this case in terms of safety, the need there, because what if this person defaults on the loan? I'm now caught with that. What if I go to apply for a loan of my own, and my credit rating is based upon having another loan that I'm responsible for as well. So it does have quite a bit of impact.
And yet you don't want to, you might need to repair your relationship with this person if you say no, based on a financial and a safety fit.
Well, that's part of my thinking about, I'm so angry at myself. Why am I so worried about what this other person might think of me if I were to say, no, that's not something I would do. There's my boundary. But if I'm more worried about what will this person think of me, or even other people think of me, I cross my own boundary and then feel resentful of myself in doing that. So the boundary identification there is I need to learn how to say no to a request that I'm getting the feelings, this isn't okay for me. And I need to be careful of respecting the boundary I have for respecting myself as much as I would somebody else.
Yeah, that's a lesson.
Isn't it though? Yeah.
Sometimes we
feel we don't have the right to
ask
to
for
respect
ourselves.
Yeah.
But as we said in our first episode, having boundaries helps us become healthy and happy and successful.
Well, a relationship that's built with that resentment there
Isn't going to be a good one
that isn't going to
anyway.
be a healthy type of relating.
So I was thinking of a couple of other examples about not taking care of myself. And sometimes just when you're making plans with people and you're more accommodating than maybe you need to be, you have to give things up that you would really like to do just to belong to the group and to have that experience. And it doesn't always feel like other people are giving up those things and you're always bending. And that could just be a boundary with your time. And that's tricky in a group, like trying to make it work for everybody.
Have you ever had the situation too, Marsha, where at first it seemed okay, but then as time wore on, you began to think, what am I doing?
Yeah.
This does not feel comfortable.
Right.
And then you're caught in the, how do I get out of this?
And we're identifying our feelings and our needs and talking about the boundaries today. And we're going to talk in our next episode about, okay, so now you recognize the boundary and how your needs are not getting met. What do you do and how do you articulate it? I'm thinking of one more example. It could be a partner who doesn't consult you. Like for instance, let's say my partner told our teenage daughter that she could go to a concert, take our car and go off with a friend, and didn't consult me. So it's not something that happened to me per se, but I feel like disrespected. I feel like I don't matter. I might feel frustrated or anxious or undermined or subordinated, manipulated, that I wasn't in part of that conversation.
And the intensity of that feeling could be even magnified if the other partner was a step parent. That makes it even more of an infraction of a boundary.
Right. Well, when you have these kind of blended situations,
that are fairly
that's
common.
Where who gets to make those decisions anyway is tricky. And then that third person who may have been granted, like, oh yeah, you can go. Like, how do I rescind that permission? I kind of can't. Probably, I don't know.
Or you'll pay a price.
Or there's going to be a price because then there's disappointment and then anger there. And just maybe I find sometimes that the sequence of talking to people about things or the sense of equality or power, I want to believe that we're equal in our parenting and maybe the other person thinks it doesn't matter or that they have the superiority to make the decision on that. And
that's
it could
that
be
need for respect.
Yeah, respect and shared responsibility.
Honoring the role of a parent, as you say, equal.
So there are lots of ways. I have actually, since we've been talking about the boundaries, been much more aware of my own and have been a little braver about noticing whether I really want to do something and thinking about how do I say no or
One for me, and a similar thing, because I've also, as we've worked on this, felt more of an awareness. But one of the thoughts for me has been, how do I not feel guilty for exercising that boundary or letting somebody know, I'm not comfortable with this?
Well, much like a lot of our learning experiences, either the reward or the punishment that we get at the end of the decision can inform our next endeavor. So if we're getting joy out of either saying yes or setting a boundary that protects ourselves, then maybe we'll be more likely to do it the next time.
True. And just taking
just the opposite.
pride in ourselves, that I feel so good because I really did share what I felt about this, and it didn't ruin the relationship. In fact, the other party was actually grateful for me for being so honest about how I felt. So now we are even closer. Whereas if I had just been afraid to do that, I might still be friends, but I always would be carrying in my mind that sense of resentment. Will this happen again?
Or I've been used, when in fact I did it to myself.
Exactly.
So it doesn't necessarily have to tarnish the relationship. You can still preserve the relationship and get what you need to. And we're going to be talking about that next time.
In fact, I think percentage-wise, in most cases, it makes the relationship better when it's done tactfully and with respect for the other party, as well as yourself. But I think that's, for me at least, it was getting used to the idea that it's okay, because that was one of the messages that I would receive as a child. It's not okay.
Not okay. You have to give, and you have to accommodate, and you have to. We may have both come from accommodating places. Yes. I think with age, it's a little bit easier too, because we've learned that it'll be okay, or we start taking inventory about what's important, and you're looking at that finite amount of time and mortality, and you turn to yourself perhaps a little bit more, and so it's easier to establish those boundaries with some convictions.
I think you actually pick up respect from other people who know when I talk with that person, they will be honest and open with me. I know where they stand, and that's a feeling of security in a relationship, whether it's between a parent and a child, or between a boss and an employee, or between partners.
Friends, yeah. So, but it's easier said than done,
yes.
So we are going to actually put specific words and intentions and ways of communicating our boundaries next time.
Skills we'll put out there, yes.
When we invite you to join us again with the Relationship Toolbox.